What's going on, guys? Today we are here to talk about Buchholz system versus the old Swiss style system, or what I like to call the Gibbs style system of what we used to do in the RLCS. Want to give my thoughts on it. Obviously, clear biases towards the old system because I kind of wrote how that played out compared to the Buchholz system now. One thing to note, we just did a huge video about why the RLCS format feels bad right now, going into double elim groups. And one thing I want to note here is Buchholz is not the problem there. It is just a different way of doing Swiss. And I don't think this is generally a huge concern overall. But I just wanted to voice my opinions on why I like the old style versus the new style. This is going to be kind of a preachy video, probably not too much going on in terms of documentation of like bringing things up. I'm kind of just going to talk it through. One thing to note is, I said this in the last video, I'm going to say it here again. Every single format looks amazing before you use it, right? And every format you're currently using, you start seeing the flaws happen, right? Because every format has flaws, but the only way to really see those is to put them into practice, right? So worst case scenarios happen, but usually it just depends on balancing how much of a worst case is it versus not, right? So I want to go into a couple things. My main reason why I like the old system versus the new system, and we'll kind of talk about maybe Counter-Strike here a bit, because Blast also kind of runs those. They do Buchholz there. And why I think it makes maybe more sense there than it does in Rocket League. So let's begin there, right? So Counter-Strike, they do their Swisses. They always do best of 3 when it comes to a qualifying match or an like elimination match. So that would be like round 3 onwards, generally speaking. Outside of, I'm not sure if they do it for the 1-on-1s. I don't think they do. But basically anything after that, right? The round 3 2-0s, round 3 0-2s, round 4s, round 5s. Now, it's kind of difficult, I would say, to determine it based on rounds, because in Counter-Strike, there are times when you purposely lose rounds and all of that, and you're not trying to press for rounds. You're trying to get the win in the way that makes the most sense for your team, economically, and all that stuff. So it's not always about trying your hardest every single round in order to get the best round differential. So I can see why they would not use round differential, right? And in that case, then you're only going to have wins and losses, right? So everyone is just going to be 1-0, moving on, and there's nothing else to compare, right? So Buchholz, I think, makes more sense there, because then you at least have like, oh, they played harder teams. We can kind of seed based on that, right? Makes a little more sense there. In Rocket League, the one thing I love about our game is that every single 5-minute match, a team is trying to win, right? And generally speaking, and I know there is some like randomness to Rocket League, very much like hockey, I would say, where like there's always going to be a little bit of randomness there. But generally speaking, if you're a great team, you are going to 3-0 teams more than you're going to 3-2 them, right? It's just the nature of the beast, because every 5-minute game is different. Every team is trying to win every single 5-minute game. There is no advantage to losing a game here or there. It just doesn't make any sense in Rocket League, right? So game differential in general shows how good you are, right? Now, obviously, it depends on who your opponent is and all of that, but that's where kind of your seed comes into play when you first get seeded into a tournament, right? Based on RLCS points, we'll say, right? So if you're seed 1, yeah, you're going to get easier matchups, but you better make sure you make good use of that by going 3-0, right? And making sure every game counts. Right now, in Buchholz versus the old style, games just don't matter. They literally don't. Like, yes, they matter in terms of you want to win the match 3-2, but in the grand plan of the entire event, games just really don't matter. And I think that was a great way to compare teams in terms of games, right? Of like, what is their form right now? Now, again, there is some RNG involved in that. There's some RNG involved in just winning matches too, right? Which we've seen in the past. So I think, but the main thing that I like with the old style is that game differential matters, and that also means the players have more control. Now, it might seem like they don't have as much control, but they have more control of where they are seated, right? If a team is popping off on the day and you're also popping off on the day, you are not going to play them, right? Just the way it is. Now, if a team that is supposed to be really good, like the number one team, they only win in 5, and you pop off and you win 3-0, yes, round 2, you're going to wind up playing them, right? But theoretically, they're not looking as good as they should be, so that's why you get that matchup, right? That could be a positive or a negative, right? Because, yes, you can control your fate in terms of how good you are, but you can't control anyone around you. Now, on the contrast, in Buchholz, you control nothing. You beat whoever you play, and then you just have to hope that that team also does well later, right? So you literally are just like, all right, whatever, I'm just going to play who I'm going to play. It doesn't matter about game differential. We just got to win, and maybe that is positive. And then it's out of our hands, right? We just have to hope that that team somehow finds better form later and beats other teams so we can play easier opponents later. That is one thing I've never liked about Buchholz, is like it just doesn't make a lot of sense. For instance, round 3s, right? I think it was OCE close qualifier 1. I think it was Group A. I'm not really sure. Group B. Oh, whatever. It doesn't matter. 2 teams. I think it was Oi Oi and Wildcard. Both went 3-0, 3-0, rounds 1 and 2. They had to play each other in round 3. They put some gripes up on Twitter like this doesn't make any sense, yada yada. And I agree with them. You did exactly what you were supposed to do, but now you have to play each other, right? And it's all because of whoever they played, whatever they did in round 2. And that is one of my major gripes with Buchholz is round 3 is only determined by your round 1 matchup. No matter what else happens, round 2 it doesn't matter because, like, if you won, everyone else that you're about to play also won their round 2 matchup, so your opponent lost that. So, like, all 4 opponents. So, say you're 2-0. In your 1-0 matchup, you won. That means your round 2 opponent is 1-1 no matter what. All 4 teams that are 2-0, their round 2 opponent is 1-1. So their Buchholz scores are exactly the same. All that matters is who they played in round 1. They obviously beat that team, so it just matters what that round 1 team did in round 2. And that's the only thing we seed based on. To me, I think seeding for round 3 makes a whole lot more sense to do it based on game differential, based on your power, compared to just whoever you got in round 1 for your opponent that you did beat, whatever they did in round 2. So I think round 3, I think the old system clearly wins out. Round 2 is also... So round 2, I think, could be a give or take, right? Round 2 is very much based on your game differential of game 1 in the old style. In Buchholz, it is just your seed coming into the tournament. And I think a lot of people like to protect top seeds. I personally don't. But a lot of people like to protect top seeds and give them the easiest matchups possible. We've seen this argument for the group stage of the RLCS right now. It's like, oh, just do Swiss. It doesn't matter if, like our beloved 2 seed went 3-2 in Swiss. We should still give them the 2 seed in groups. I disagree there. Like, I could see them being the 6th seed, like the best of the 3-2 teams, but I wouldn't go any higher, right? Because you got to punish these teams at some point for losing games, and you got to reward the underdog teams that get wins, right? Because my main argument there is, say a team is seeded 15th and they go 3-0 in Swiss, and you want to just put them all the way back down to the 15th seed, that seems messed up, right? So they should at least be the 4th seed, right? Because they went 3-0. There's 4 teams that go 3-0 across the 2 Swisses. Anyway, going back, round 2, very game differential heavy, but generally speaking, if the way we do it is you're doing 1 versus 16, 2 versus 15, because we do it more of like a triple elim bracket with no upper bracket buys. Generally, those teams should 3-0, right? And if they don't, then there's probably an issue, right? With that team, and maybe then they deserve that harder matchup. Does that 2 seed of, say, Vitality, who goes 3-0, while K-Corp goes 3-2, they have to play round 2 now. Does that make sense? Now, to be fair, with that game differential, there's only certain ways that can go. So say K-Corp goes 3-2. They would have to be the only match that went 3-2 for them to be the lowest seed, right, going into the next round. So I think those tiebreakers happen, and like that has happened before, where we have had like the two top seeds have to play in round two, but it is more rare than you would think, I guess you would say. Now, again, that doesn't happen at all in Buchholz, so I could see round two kind of going either way, right? So we got round two going either way. Round three going, I think, heavily to the old system, in my opinion. Round four is where it kind of muddies the waters a bit. One thing I think when everyone argues about Buchholz versus the old style system is they forget that the old style system does have Buchholz kind of built in, and I'll explain that in a moment. Basically, what we do in the old system is a triple elim bracket. You stay in the upper bracket as long as possible. You will always play a lower bracket team that comes up to you if you lose, right? The only times that changes slightly is round four, right? Round four, you have two teams out of the upper bracket, but you have four teams that come from the lower, right? So two of those lower teams will have to play each other, so they don't have to play one of the upper bracket teams, right? That happens also on the bottom side, where there's two teams coming from the triple lower or the double lower, I guess you would say, versus four teams coming from that middle side, and they drop down, right? So two of those teams will have to play each other. But we do seed based on how far you stay in that upper side, right? So it's not like, oh, you went 2-0, now you're playing K-Corp, and you get 3-0'd, and your game differential's in the bins, right? You won like maybe a 3-2 and a 3-1, now you get 0-3. You're at 0 game differential. That doesn't necessarily affect you that much because you're still going to be the 2 seed, right? Going into that group for round 4. So it still does seed, generally speaking, based on Buchholz. Because if you're a 2-0 team, your Buchholz is probably pretty good. You're probably going to be a top 2 seed anyway, right? There are instances where I guess you would not be, but I think pretty much always you're going to be at least a top 2 seed. You might fall to 3, but I think that's very rare. In general, so I don't think that really hurts Buchholz there, but I think they're similar, very, very close in round 4. Like, I think they, like, more times than not, you'd probably get the same matchups or close to the same matchups that you would have anyway. Round 5, Buchholz probably plays more of a factor, but again, it was built into the old system. If you came from the 2 and 1 side, you play a team that came from the 1 and 2 side, right? So you play a lower bracket team, you play an upper bracket team. I think this one's kind of wishy-washy. It's like basically the same matchups. I think Buchholz might get a slight edge here of being a tiny bit more accurate, but that's also because there's more data, right? Like, Buchholz is good when it was invented for like chess for giant tournaments, right? Where they play tons and tons of rounds, and it makes way more sense. You have way more data to go along with that. While in just a round 5 thing, it doesn't really make as much sense. Now let's go back to round 1, because we didn't really talk about round 1. Round 1 is where I think there's arguments on both sides. Buchholz does 1 versus 9, 2 versus 10, and so on and so forth, right? Some people like that, some people don't. The reason why they do that, and so your Buchholz score will remain high as the 1 seed, right? If you're the 1 seed and you take down a 9 seed, that 9 seed theoretically should do better than the last seed of the tournament, right? Like, they're about to play each other in round 2. 9 seed's going to win more times than not. So the E1 seed, or the number 1 seed, I should say, is going to have a better Buchholz score, right? Going into round 3. You would hope, right? So that's based on those round 2 matchups. Not always the case, obviously, but that's a problem with any format, right? It's like there's going to be underdog matches or upset wins. That's going to change everything. The one thing I always see an argument for is, well, Buchholz, because of that seeding, they make sure the top 8 teams come out, even if it's chalk, right? Which just means the higher seed always wins. The one issue when you have like an 8-9 seed and like all those close seeds play in round 1 is that they're also going to play in round 3 and they're also going to play in round 4. A lot of these seeds will play each other, and so rematches when you get to round 5, if it's perfect, you can't have the top teams play the bottom teams because everyone is rematched a lot. So you really get like 6 versus 8 or something like that, right? So you don't get the top 8 teams out. And that's if it's chalk and everything. But in Buchholz, because you don't have those matches happen in round 1, you only have matches in round 3 and 4. There's less rematches, and you can get it so the uppers play the lowers, right? That is not necessarily a Buchholz solution. It's more of just like, what do you do in that round 1, right? To seed. Personally, again, I like the triple elim bracket style of like, let's do a proper bracket and we'll move on, right? So one will get a good reward for being the 1 seed. They get an easier round 1 matchup. But I think there is a solution to that, even in the old way, where you still reward the top 4 seeds, and then you just mix up 5 through 12. I'm going to show that on screen here real quick. So this is one of the few things we'll show. So this is for the major coming up, right? Right now, the major coming up actually has the number 1 seed versus the 9 seed, right? So EU1 versus OCE1. When this got announced, and this was known because it's Buchholz, is like a lot of people were upset by this, right? Because it would be EU1 versus OCE1, 2 seed would be NA1 versus NA3, and then the NA2 would get a very easy matchup against like APAC, right? So it was more like, all right, why would you want to be NA1? Because you're going to have to play NA3 versus if you're NA2, you get to play against APAC. That was the old style, which I should have probably made a picture of as well. But just bear with me here. And I agree with that. The main thing you want in Swiss is the probability to just win your games, right? I think everyone knows this. Like, yes, like even when you only need one winner of something, and it's just like everyone has one life in a bracket, it's not as good, right? Because it really determines, like if you did random seeds, the probability that you win all these matches is very much based on your opponent, right? Of if you have easier opponents, your probability will go up to win the entire tournament. Even if you're the best team in the world, like K-Corp, I'll say, if they have a very difficult part of their bracket, their probability to win the entire tournament is much lower because there's a higher percentage that those other teams beat them, right? Like even if it is only 20%, it's more than the 10% of the other teams that they should be playing, right? And that is because of the benefit of the 1 seed. So all that being said is the probability of winning is lower in round 1 at least for the NA1 seed than the NA2 seed in the old style, where NA2 would be playing APAC, or the new style, I should say. The NA2 would be playing APAC, and NA1 is playing NA3. That's just a fact, right? We know there's a couple weaker teams in the international play, and that is definitely one of them. APAC and SSA are those 2 general freebies, I would say. And I don't mean to sound harsh, but that's generally how it goes, right? So there's a way to solve it where you can still get your top 8 teams out, even if it is chalk, game differential, or whatever. One thing in Buchholz, chalk's a lot easier to happen than in game differential, because game differential, again, bases it on every single game, while Buchholz only bases it on every single match. So right there, it is a ratio of 5 to 1, right? Or it's probably 4 to 1, but based on the average length of a best of 5, right? You have 4 different games to determine where teams are moving. And in Buchholz, you only have 1 match, right? So that changes things there. So in this case, you would move 5. So you do like a SAM 1 to play OCE1. You got EU3 versus NA3, NA2 versus SAM 2, EU4 versus MENA 2. Basically, what you do is you only space out the 8 teams in the middle, and you make them play only 4 seeds higher than them, right? Basically, what this does is it moves teams away just enough that if it was a perfect bracket, you would still not have as many rematches in round 5, which really comes to play because like 8 versus 12, right? In the perfect bracket, in round 5, you have 6 through 11 in seeds. So 8, more times than not, would play 9 in round 1, then 10 in round 3. Then they would play another close team in round 4. And there would just be too many rematches across all of them. So in this case, then if you go to chalk, it would result in like 8 would play, I think 11, 7 would play 10, and so on and so forth. So that would solve that issue. And also, I think that this looks a lot better to seed a major than to do just your normal buckles, because you still get the reward if you're the EU1 and NA1 for the very easy matchup. Even MENA1 gets a much easier matchup in NA4 versus what they would have had to play with SAM2, which I guess like is comparable. And then EU2 gets to play OC2 rather than MENA2, which I think they would also take. The teams in the middle are usually so close that like it's okay if you diversify it a little bit. And the one fault, I guess you would say, is, well, now the game differential, like EU1 and NA1 are going to have a huge advantage. So I'm like, yes, but they also kind of deserve it because they're EU1 and NA1, right? That's what they get. That's their reward. One thing to note, and I think it's been a thing that's been harped on a lot, is in the old system, it was better to lose round 1 for your chances to qualify. And I would say that was kind of misleading. Now, I have a small data set here, but basically what I did was I went back into RLCS 24 and just looked at it across the board, right? Of round 1 losses, how many of these teams qualified through Swiss. Now, there's some notes here. I think it's actually easier to do that in RLCS 24 because it's your best of the best teams where like everyone is closer. So top 16 is much closer than top 32, right? Because in top 32, there should be teams that are way worse, right, than others. So I would say it's easier to do in RLCS 24 to lose round 1 but still qualify than it is to do now in RLCS 25. If you lose round 1, it's very likely because you're a bad team and you'll fall out, right? Because teams are more spread apart. And also with Buchholz, you're seeded 8 seeds away from each other. So those upsets should happen less, I would say, than if teams are seeded close, right? 8 versus 9, there's more likelihood that that match goes the opposite way and 9 beats 8 than 8 versus last place and 9 versus the top seed. So, like, if you get my drift there. So, on that, I went through, and again, small data set that this could change wildly throughout. But basically, I went through EU and North America because they're the most competitive regions, especially at the top 32 level. And I didn't want to kind of go further to hurt the EU 25 numbers or the RLCS 25 numbers by including like the APAC region, where obviously the top 32, there's going to be less of a pull for round 1 winners, right? So basically, to lose round 1 and advance in EU 25, that is all 6 Swisses that we've had in Opens 1, 2, and 3, there's a 25% chance that if you lost round 1, you advanced. Or 25% of the time it happened. So 12 teams out of the 48 that advance out of their top 8 of Swiss lost in round 1. In EU 24, we also had 48 teams here that had a chance. Only 11 advanced. Now, again, one team difference is not a huge deal. It's also a small sample size, so that's 23% of the time. So it goes from 25% of the time in EU 25, where it's supposed to be harder to make it out of Buchholz if you lose round 1 than it is in the old system, because that was number one complaint, I would say, of the old system. Is like, it's better to lose round 1. Well, it was harder in the old system, at least in terms of this data set. Of 23% of the time in the old system, you lose round 1, you would advance. 25% now. Basically, what that means is it's exactly the same, right? And again, small data set, so we'll continue. For North America, in RLCS 25, a little bit less data because they haven't done their most recent Swiss, or maybe I just didn't count it because I thought they didn't. Oh, no, that's coming up now. That's coming up this weekend, so that's why it's not in here. 7, sorry. Out of 32 teams, 22% of the time, they advance. If you lose round 1 in the new system, you advance, right? So 22% of the time. In the old system, it was 23% of the time you would lose round 1 and you would advance. 11 out of 48. So again, this time it's the opposite, right? Where it was one team better. all this is being said is, at least with our small sample sizes, again, not huge, it's basically the same. It didn't really matter that much. But my argument there is Buchholz is you're supposed to have round one winners all be the top 8 seeds, right? In the old system, there's more fighting going on, right, with those middle seeds. So in theory, like if it was a major complaint of the old system, the percents of losing round one and advancing should definitely be higher. And that also is because the teams were more competitive in the old system compared to now with the top 32. So, yeah. So I think like that negative of the old system was completely just blown out of proportion, right? It just didn't make a lot of sense. This is a very long video. I'm sorry. But I kind of just wanted to go over what my thoughts are, right? I think the main things to consider with Buchholz is it rules out individual games, which I'm not a huge fan of. It is like it takes the control out of teams' hands, which I also don't like. Maybe at the end of the day, it makes it more fair in round 5. I think round 5 is the only round, but I think it's very, very slight. It's not as much as you might think. Now, for seeding purposes, which we didn't really get to here, I think Buchholz, yes, to seed teams later on in the tournament, I think it makes more sense than to use game differential, right? Because game differential is used throughout to give yourself easier matches, but if you have a higher game differential, like we run into that fact with the 2-0 teams where if you just get blasted out, like a game differential wasn't the only case to give you a seed in rounds 3, 4, and 5, right? It was based on if you came from the upper bracket or lower bracket. And we lose that at the end of Swiss because they only base it on game differential, right? So you kind of lose part of that seeding, which I think Buchholz brings that seeding back in, right? Which I don't mind that. Like I think if there was a way to do it, I would probably agree with Buchholz system to seed your top 8 versus the game differential. We talked about some small changes to that, which includes Buchholz, where it's more about how long you're in that upper part of the bracket. And I think that works too, to determine teams for the 3, 4, 5 tiebreaker. That all being said, it's a very long video. It's a very preachy video. I assume not a lot of people are here to the end. There was a Reddit thread about this 2 years ago that I had a great discussion with. I'm going to see if I still have it here. I might have gotten rid of it for right now. I want to give them some shout outs. With, who was it? With Travehen. I'm not sure if he's still around or whatever. But it was a great Reddit thread about a Buchholz plus game differential. The arguments don't really work as well right now because it was based on Buchholz being 1 versus 16, 2 versus 15 in round 1. But there's still a lot of good points made, I think, by him and made by me as well throughout the Reddit comments. So if you want to check that out, I'll leave a link in the description below. But generally speaking, I think it's not a huge deal, Buchholz versus the old styles, but I do prefer the old style. And again, I have biases because I built that system. I'm, of course, going to like it. But I think there's been so much praise of Buchholz before it was introduced and so much negativeness to the system that we were currently using that I kind of wanted to flip that script and be like, well, now we have Buchholz and we're seeing a lot of negatives there as well, right? So I kind of just wanted to say my piece on this. And again, I know this video is not perfectly organized. It's not usually how I make my videos. I kind of just like to talk at a camera. And for some reason, there's a few of you that will stay to the very end. So I appreciate that very much. But definitely check out the Reddit thread if you are more interested. And I probably give better thoughts there and more organized thoughts. That this Reddit thread was 2 years ago. And my thoughts really haven't changed too much. But there's probably a couple things in there that have changed or whatever. But yeah, go take a look at that. Thank you guys for watching. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.